In this week's episode of the Stockscores Market Minutes, I'm going to show you how I find longer term stock trades, what I look for. Plus, I will do my regular weekly market analysis. We're going to look at the day trade of the week on EVRI, and we'll do a market scan in search of opportunity. So how do I find stock trades? Well, the principles that I use for longer term trades are very similar as I use for short term trades. And if you've been on this channel for a while, you'll know I've recently described how I swing trade, how I day trade. And the concept for position trading or longer term trading is pretty much the same. I'm looking for abnormal price moves, what we call stock scores action candles, from a predictive chart pattern. And when I see that, I then assess the risk of the trade and enter it accordingly. Now, what's important to understand is that when we're doing this, we're doing it on a daily chart time frame, and there are thousands of stocks to choose from, so we need a tool to find them very quickly. And that is where the Stockscores Market Scan comes in. And at the end of the video, we will use the market scan and I will run through the process with you. But what I want to show you first is just a couple of examples of stocks that I have picked in the last little while. One was relatively recently, one a little farther back, one looking at a daily chart and one looking at a weekly chart. And which chart you choose depends on how long you want to hold for. If you're looking to hold for a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, you're going to focus on the daily chart. If you want to hold longer than that, then you focus on the weekly chart. But the formula is the same. Looking for those stock scores action candles, those abnormal price moves with abnormal volume out of predictive chart patterns. So let's take a look at some of those charts now. This is a chart of Riot Blockchain, and it is a stock that I featured in my newsletter right there. And you can see that it broke through resistance from a rising bottom. That's something called an ascending triangle pattern. But what's most important is it had abnormal volume and abnormal price. And since that time, it has been moving nicely higher. Now, this is a relatively recent pick and has only been going up for a few weeks, but still the performance has been excellent so far. If you want to look at a longer term example, I featured Ballard Power back in here, and again, breaking through resistance from optimism, rising bottoms, with abnormal volume, with abnormal price action. But notice that this is a weekly chart. Same formula, just looking at a different chart time frame. And in that case, the stock has gone from just around $7, a little over $7, to where it is now 24 after hitting 28. And again, on the weekly time frame. All right, well, let's get into this week's market analysis, starting off with a look at the US markets, as we always do. And this is the chart of the S&P 500 intraday 30-day 60-minute chart. And you can see that we've got rising bottoms. That's a sign of optimism. You can also see that we've been going sideways for the last few days, but generally the trend is up, and so we should be optimistic in the short term about US stocks. Longer term, something similar. We have rising bottoms on the chart. That's a sign of optimism. Very simple. Most people don't think about it being that simple, but it really is. When the buyers are in control and there's rising bottoms, the market goes up. Until that's broken, you just want to stick with the trend, and right now the trend is up. Looking at the NASDAQ 100, similar situation. This, the daily chart, recent breakout to new highs from rising bottoms. We have optimism and the market's moving higher. Now, volume is low. Of course, we had the Thanksgiving holidays in the last little while, so volumes are a little light right now, but still plenty of opportunity. Every day there are stocks making big price moves. Russell 2000, this is really where the action is in the US small caps, and you can see that we're in more of an upward trend here. And that's really been great for trading because some of those lower price stocks are really moving nicely. On to the Canadian markets, and we'll start off here with the TSX 60. It also has rising bottoms, but you can see that it's sort of flattened out the last little while. So it's a little bit more neutral. I mean, the momentum is still to the upside, but I'd like to see the Canadian market break out of this sideways trading range. Longer term, the trend is up, but we are coming into resistance. So we may stall soon, and that makes the Canadian market look a little bit less quality than the US. TSX Venture, of course, the microcap stocks in Canada, and they're starting to build some upward momentum and breaking out to new highs. We are seeing strength in cannabis, a little bit of strength in the last week in some of the mining names, and that's helping this market move higher. And now commodities, we'll take a look at gold. Gold, of course, had a breakdown last week. It made a little bit of a comeback this week as it tries to hold that long-term upward trend line. So we're right at the long-term upward trend line. I'm not going to be too optimistic about gold until it can break that pullback line. But for now, it's stable, but I still wouldn't be too enthusiastic about being a buyer of gold or gold stocks unless they have really exceptional individual charts. On the oil side, we are building some upward momentum. This is the daily chart. You can see we're slowly building rising bottoms. We've broken to the highs for the year, and that's a positive, but volume is light, and so it's cautiously optimistic with oil. And finally, the fear chart. You can see fear is pretty low, and that is an indication that you can be relatively optimistic about stocks in general. So my ratings then, bullish on both time frames for US stocks, neutral long-term for Canadian, but bullish short-term. Gold, neutral long-term and bearish short-term. We still haven't broken the pullback. And oil, neutral long-term and bullish short-term as momentum starts to build. You know, while the market indexes haven't shown a lot of excitement in the past week, there is action every day in individual stocks. We've got really high trading volumes, and that is a good trading environment. Lots of action every day. And so if you have ever aspired to be a trader, or perhaps you used to be one and you took a break, now's a great time to come back as the market is quite strong. Gold is trying to hold that upward trend line. We'll see if that can happen. And as I said, oil is slowly building optimism. Well, now I want to take a look at the day trade of the week. This is an example of a stock that we looked at in the active live service on Stockscores. You can learn more about that at the Stockscores website. And this week it's EVRI, which was a trade on Thursday, breaking with the action candle. There's the abnormal price, the abnormal volume that we talked about earlier, but in this case it's on a 2-minute time frame, and that is a special indicator that I run every day in active live on the entire US stock market, looking for stocks that do this. Well, EVRI for $100 of risk required the purchase of 550 shares. That's $6,400 in capital. If you can margin that, I've got there $3,150. It's actually $2,150 in capital. And that was a $920 gain at the end of the day. So again, I've done my calculations wrong. It's more like a 50% gain or close to a 50% gain on this trade, 45% roughly. Quickly in my head, I'm calculating that. And that's an awesome day trade. And those are the kind of trades that are really coming up every day in the market, and we're finding those with active live. All right, well, now I want to jump over to the Stockscores Market Scan tool. So earlier in the video, I talked about how I find position trades. This is the tool that I use. It's the Stockscores Market Scan. I'm just going to jump over to it now. And we're going to run the scan that I like to run every day, which is the abnormal break scan. So I click on that, and this is a preset scan. It's available to investor members or active trader members of Stockscores. And again, you can learn more about that in the trader training menu. Go to learn how to trade in the different areas in there. You can learn more about how to become a member of Stockscores. Anyway, we're going to run the scan. Found 70 stocks that meet the basic criteria. And our final step is to inspect those charts in search of stocks breaking from predictive chart patterns. Now, this is where you have to have a skill that I will teach you. And the education that I provide on Stockscores.com will teach you how to do this process, what to look for in the charts. But essentially, we're looking for a predictive chart pattern. So here's a stock that was breaking a downward trend line after a double bottom. Pretty good abnormal action there. The only problem with this trade, and the reason I wouldn't take it, is because I don't think the risk-reward ratio quite makes sense. We need at least double the upside for the downside, and this one doesn't quite have that. So although I do think that this stock is likely to go higher, I wouldn't enter it as a position trade here because simply the risk-reward ratio potential isn't quite good enough. But this is the process. We run the scan. We went from 7,000 US stocks down to 70 that have some potential, and then we inspect those charts looking for good opportunities. And all of the longer term trades that I do are found exactly this way. It takes me about 10 minutes a day. Sometimes we see a good one. This looks pretty good. You can see here a downward trend line, broke the downward trend line, building rising bottoms, breaking through resistance with some abnormal price action. My only reservation is volume's not very strong. So I would give this a 6.5 out of 10. It's not quite a 7 out of 10. What 6.5 means essentially is I think it has a 65% chance of going higher. Well, Well, hopefully that's been useful and educational for you. If so, please click the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell anyone that'll listen. But most importantly, trade well.